Margaret's kitchen was filled with the warmth of the late afternoon sun, its golden rays pouring through the lace curtains and spilling across the wooden table. The room smelled faintly of chamomile tea and fresh-baked scones cooling on a plate. Margaret moved carefully, her frail hands steady but not as strong as they once were. As she poured steaming tea into 2 porcelain cups with delicate blue flowers painted around the edges. These cups had been with her for many years, and she always used them on special occasions, especially when family came to visit. Across the table sat her grandson, Daniel. He had returned from college for the weekend, and his presence brought both comfort and curiosity. Margaret could see that something had changed in him. His face was the same handsome kind with the same soft brown eyes he had inherited from his mother, but his expression carried something heavier, as though he had been holding on to words he was not sure how to say. Margaret placed the teapot down and gave him a smile, one that spoke of love and patience. "You've been quiet today," she said, her voice gentle. "Usually, you fill this house with stories about your classes, your friends, and your adventures. What's weighing on your mind, dear?" Daniel looked at her, and his lips curved into a small, uncertain smile. He shifted in his chair, leaning forward as though the words were almost too heavy to carry while sitting back. He brushed a hand through his hair, a nervous habit she had noticed since he was a boy. "Grandma," he began, his voice softer than usual, "there's something I need to tell you. It's been on my heart for a while, and I don't know how you'll take it." Margaret tilted her head, her curiosity rising. She had raised children and seen them raise their own, and she knew the look of someone wrestling with their thoughts. Still, she wanted him to feel safe to speak. "If you know you can tell me anything," she reassured. Reaching for the sugar bowl and placing it on the table, Daniel nodded but didn't speak right away. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall and the soft hum of the kettle cooling on the stove. Margaret felt a strange anticipation building in her chest. She had always trusted her grandson's judgment. But the look in his eyes told her this was not an ordinary confession. "I met someone," he finally said. His voice carried a mix of excitement and hesitation, the kind that often accompanied matters of the heart. Margaret's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Ah," she said softly, "so this is about a girl." Daniel gave a short laugh, though his eyes remained serious. "Yes, but it's not just that. It's more to it. I didn't think much at first, but then something happened, and I can't stop thinking about it." Margaret reached for her cup, lifting it gently, but as she looked at him, her hand trembled just slightly. Something about the weight in his words, the tone he used, made her uneasy. She had lived long enough to sense when life was about to shift in unexpected ways. "What is it, Daniel?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "What happened?" He leaned closer, his elbows resting on the wooden table. His eyes, so much like his mother's, carried both youth and a burden of truth he was ready to share. "When I asked her about her family, she told me her last name. And Grandma, it's Whitmore." Margaret froze. The name hit her like a sudden chill, sending a ripple through her chest. Her hand wavered, and she quickly set the teacup back on its saucer before she could spill it. Whitmore, she had not heard that name spoken aloud in years, yet it carried with it a flood of memories she had kept. Quietly tucked away in the corners of her heart, Daniel noticed her reaction and frowned. "You know that name? Don't you?" he asked, though it sounded less like a question and more like a realization. Margaret tried to steady her breathing, but her mind was already racing back to another time, another life. She thought of a young man with warm eyes and a gentle smile, of evenings spent walking under the stars, of whispered promises made in the hush of youth. His name had been James Whitmore, and though decades had passed, she had never truly forgotten him. She looked at her grandson, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Daniel. I know that name." For a moment, the room felt still, as if even the ticking clock was waiting for what came next. Margaret's hands trembled more now, not from weakness but from the sudden rush of emotion she could not contain. She had always believed the past was something you carried quietly, hidden beneath the layers of everyday life. Yet here it was, resurfacing in the most unexpected way through her grandson. Daniel's eyes widened. I thought so. Saw the look on your face, Grandma. Who was he to you? Margaret took a slow breath, steadying herself. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the sunlight had shifted, casting long golden beams across the room. He was someone very dear to me, she said softly, her voice heavy with memory. Someone I once loved with all my heart. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and profound. Daniel leaned back in his chair, as if trying to piece together the story unfolding before him. Margaret, meanwhile, felt her own heart beating faster. The past and present colliding in a way she had never imagined. She reached again for her teacup. But her hand still trembled, and she set it down quickly. Daniel's gaze never left her face. He seemed to understand that what he had just uncovered was not simply a coincidence, but a thread connecting generations. The silence returned, heavy and charged, as though the air itself carried the weight of their unspoken thoughts. Margaret could feel the shift, the moment where life turned a corner without warning. She had been pouring tea only minutes before, expecting nothing more than an ordinary afternoon with her grandson. But his words, his revelation had changed everything. Her hands trembled not because of the tea, not because of her age, but because of the name that still carried power after so many years. Whitmore, James. The past was no longer silent. It had returned, carried on the lips of her grandson, pulling her back into a story she thought was long over, and Margaret knew, with a certainty that both frightened and comforted her, that this was only the beginning. The name lingered in the air like a sudden chill, and Margaret felt her breath catch in her throat. She had thought she would never hear it again, yet here it was, spoken by her grandson with such innocent surprise. Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on her, searching, waiting, almost pleading for her to explain why this name mattered so much. Whitmore, she whispered, her voice trembling. Are you certain? Daniel nodded quickly. Yes, Grandma. She told me right away. At first I thought nothing of it, but then I remembered the old photograph in your dresser. The one with a young man standing beside you at that summer fair. I never asked before, but is that him? Margaret's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She could almost see the photograph in her mind, the smiling face of James Whitmore. The way his arm rested gently around her shoulders, the joy in their youth captured forever in faded colors. She had kept it tucked away for decades, hidden yet never discarded. She lowered her gaze, her voice soft and uncertain. Yes, Daniel. That was James. He was a part of my life a long, long time ago. Daniel leaned forward, his curiosity growing. And now his family. They're connected to mine. Don't you see how strange that is? Of all the people I could have met at school, of all the girls I might have liked, it's her, and she carries his name. The tea between them had gone untouched, its warmth fading, but neither noticed. Margaret's mind was far away, wandering through old streets and summer nights of her youth. She had not spoken James's name in years, yet the sound of it still stirred her heart. She remembered the way he used to laugh, the way his eyes lit up when he spoke of dreams they both knew might never come true. Life had pulled them apart, but she had never forgotten him. Margaret looked back at Daniel, who was waiting for more. His hands were clasped together on the table, his expression filled with both wonder and confusion. She could tell that meeting this girl had stirred something deep inside him, the same way meeting James once had stirred her. You remind me of him, Margaret said suddenly, her voice quivering with memory. The way you lean forward when you're speaking, the way your eyes hold more than your words say. James was like that too. Always thoughtful, always carrying more in his heart than he let the world see. Daniel blinked, surprised by her sudden confession. What happened to him, Grandma? Why did you never talk about him? She drew in a long breath. Because it hurt too much? Because some loves, no matter how strong, are not meant to be lived, but only remembered. Her words sank heavily into the quiet kitchen. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, each sound marking the weight of a story unspoken for far too long. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memories wash over her. James waiting for her outside the library. The letters he had sent, the promises they had made when they thought the world was theirs. Then came the distance, the choices made by others. The silence that grew between them until it became final. Daniel broke the silence. "Grandma, this can't be just a coincidence. Don't you think it means something? That I met her?" Margaret's heart ached at the hope in his voice. She could see the boy in him, the same boy she had once been with James Young. Full of dreams, unaware of how fragile love could be when tested by life. But she could also see the man he was becoming, one who was ready to hold on to love even when it frightened him. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she placed it gently over his. "Perhaps it does mean something," she said softly. "Perhaps life has a way of weaving threads back together, even after years have passed. Maybe it's not just chance that brought her into your life." Daniel's eyes lit up, though they still carried questions. "So you think it's okay? That I shouldn't be afraid of this?" Margaret smiled faintly, though her heart was still heavy. Love should never be something to fear, Daniel. It can be difficult, yes, and sometimes it leaves scars, but it is never wrong. If she makes your heart feel alive, then hold on to that. Don't let the past frighten you away from the present. Her grandson nodded slowly, his face softening with relief. For a moment, Margaret thought the conversation was over, that the storm had passed. But Daniel's eyes still held something back, and she could sense it. She knew her grandson well enough to see that there was more. "Tell me, Daniel," she urged gently. "What else is there? I can see it in your eyes. You haven't told me everything." He hesitated, glancing down at his hands, then back up at her with a look that carried both fear and wonder. "When she said her name, I felt like I'd heard it before. I didn't understand why, but then I remembered your photograph. I thought maybe it was just my imagination. But then she told me something that made it all real." Margaret felt her chest tighten. The air around her seemed heavier, waiting for his words. "What did she tell you?" Daniel leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. "She said her family always spoke about her grandfather, James Whitmore. And she said that even though he had a long life, he often told them stories about a woman he loved when he was young. A woman named Margaret." The words struck Margaret like a sudden blow. Her hands, which had been resting on the table, began to shake so much she had to pull them into her lap. Her heart raced, tears welling in her eyes as the past she thought was lost returned with startling clarity. James had remembered her. After all the years, after the silence and the distance, he had carried her name with him. He had told his family about her. She pressed her hand against her chest, her voice breaking as she spoke. "He remembered me." Daniel watched her, his expression filled with tenderness. "Yes, Grandma. He remembered you. He told him about you like you were a part of his heart that never left." Margaret closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. The years melted away in that moment, and she was no longer just an old woman sitting in her kitchen. She was a girl again, standing under the summer sky with James, feeling the rush of first love, believing it would last forever. And though life had taken him from her, love had kept her memory alive in him. When she opened her eyes again, she looked at Daniel with a trembling smile. "Oh, my dear boy, love is never truly lost. It waits in the quiet corners of our lives until it finds a way back. Sometimes through us, sometimes through those who come after us." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "Then maybe that's why I found her, Grandma. Maybe it's not just my storiette's part of yours, too." Margaret nodded, her tears falling freely now. "Yes, Daniel, perhaps it is." And in that moment, she realized the past had not vanished. It had simply been waiting for the right time, the right place, the right heart to carry it forward. Margaret sat in silence, her hands trembling, her mind drifting between past and present. Daniel's words had opened a door she thought had been locked forever. James Whitmore. The name echoed inside her chest like a soft bell. She had lived a full life, marriage, children, grandchildren, but a part of her had always belonged to James. And now, through Daniel, His memory had returned with a force she could not ignore. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Daniel was still watching her, waiting, his young face filled with both worry and hope. She knew he wanted more than just reassurance. He wanted to understand the story behind the name that had shaken her so deeply. Daniel, she said softly, her voice trembling with both weakness and strength. I need to tell you about him. You deserve to know who James was to me. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on the wooden table, his eyes fixed on hers. Please, Grandma, I want to know everything. Margaret folded her hands together, her gaze drifting toward the window. The sunlight had shifted, painting long shadows across the floor, as though time itself was leaning closer to listen. She began slowly, each word pulled from the depths of memory. I met James when I was just about your age. It was at a summer dance, in a little town hall strung with lights. Everyone was laughing, the air was warm, and there was music in the background. I didn't want to go that night, but my friend insisted. And then I saw him. Her lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes softening with the memory. He wasn't the loudest person in the room, but when he looked at me, I felt as if I was the only one there. He asked me to dance, and from that moment, we were inseparable. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression serious. He could sense how much it cost her to pull these memories back into the open. We would walk for hours, Margaret continued, her voice growing steadier. We would sit under the big maple tree near the river, talking about the future. He wanted to travel to see the world. I wanted to be a teacher. We promised each other we'd always find a way to be together. And for a while, it felt like nothing could stop us. Her smile faded, replaced by a shadow in her eyes. But life is never that simple. My parents didn't approve. They thought James's family didn't have enough stability, that he was too much of a dreamer. They wanted me to marry someone safer, someone who could promise a secure life. And then his family moved away. Suddenly, his father got work in another city. We wrote letters for a while, but eventually, the letters stopped. Daniel frowned. He just stopped writing. Margaret shook her head gently. No, I think it was both of us. Life pulled us in different directions. My family pressured me. He had to work. Days turned into months, months into years. And when the silence grew too heavy, I thought it was best to let go. Her voice cracked slightly, though she quickly steadied it. I married your grandfather. He was a good man, Daniel. He gave me a kind home and a family I will always be grateful for. But a part of me always wondered about James, where he was, what he was doing, if he ever thought of me when the nights grew quiet. Daniel's chest tightened as he listened. He had never seen his grandmother speak with such raw honesty before. It was as if she had peeled back years of silence, revealing a piece of her heart no one had touched. Did you ever see him again? He asked gently. Margaret shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. No, I never saw him again. But I never forgot him. She paused, pressing her hand against her chest. And now you're telling me he remembered me too. That he spoke my name to his family even after all these years. That means more than I can say. The room grew quiet again, heavy with the weight of both love and loss. The clock ticked steadily. But Margaret felt as though time itself had slowed. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing it gently. Grandma, maybe this is life's way of bringing something back to you. Maybe me meeting hurts, not just chance. Maybe it's a thread connecting us all. Margaret looked at him, her heart aching with both sorrow and hope. She saw James and her grandson Newen, the way Daniel's eyes held sincerity. In the way he spoke with such passion about the girl he cared for. It was as if love itself had traveled through the years, refusing to fade, finding new ways to live, you know? Daniel, she said quietly, sometimes love doesn't disappear. It changes shape. It waits in silence, but it never truly leaves us. I think what you've found is not just your own story, it's part of something greater. Perhaps love has found its way back through you. Daniel's face softened, his shoulders relaxing. That's what I feel too. When I'm with her, it's like I've known her forever. Like there's something familiar I can't explain. And now I think I understand why. Margaret nodded slowly. She could feel her heart trembling, not with fear this time, but with the realization that love was larger than she had ever allowed herself to believe. What she had lost had not been lost at all. It had lingered quietly, waiting for this moment. For her grandson to bring it back into her life, she let out a soft sigh, her voice heavy with both gratitude and sorrow. If James remembered me all these years, then I can live knowing what we had was real. And Daniel, if you feel something real with this girl, don't run from it. Don't let the world make you give it up. Hold on, because true love, when it comes, it's worth everything. Daniel's eyes glistened with emotion. He squeezed her hand again and whispered, "I promise, Grandma, I won't let it go." Margaret smiled through her tears. She could see the determination in him, the kind she once saw in herself when she held James's hand under the summer stars. Perhaps Daniel's love story would succeed where hers had faltered. Perhaps this was how love healed, by finding its way through generations. By refusing to be silenced, the tea on the table had grown cold, but neither of them cared. What mattered was the bridge that had been built between past and present. Between a grandmother's lost love and a grandson's new beginning. Margaret's heart trembled still, but this time it was not with fear. It was with the knowledge that love, even when separated by years and distance, never truly died. And in that quiet kitchen, with the fading light wrapping around them, Margaret and Daniel sat together, bound by a story that had started long before him and would now continue through him. The room was filled with silence, but Margaret's heart was racing. She had lived through wars, raised a family, buried loved ones, and endured the quiet weight of years, yet nothing had made her tremble like this moment. Her grandson's words had broken through time itself. James had remembered her. He had spoken her name to his family, carried her memory through the seasons of his life. And now that memory had reached her, not through a letter or a visit, but through the next generation, through Daniel and the girl he loved. Margaret lifted her teacup again, but her hands shook so badly that the porcelain rattled against the saucer. She quickly set it back down, afraid she might spill. Daniel noticed and leaned forward. "Grandma, are you all right?" She nodded, but her eyes glistened with tears. "I'm all right, my dear. It's just, I never expected to hear his name again, much less in this way." Daniel looked at her with such tenderness that it made her chest ache. He wasn't just her grandson in this moment. He was also a bridge, a thread tying her past to his future. "When she told me about him," Daniel continued, his voice low, "she said he always spoke of you with so much love. That even when the years passed, he never stopped calling you the girl who changed his life." Margaret pressed her trembling fingers to her lips. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. The thought of James older, surrounded by family, still remembering her name, still carrying her in his heart, was almost too much to bear. "Oh, James," she whispered, the words escaping before she could hold them back. It was as though the decades had collapsed, and she was once again that young woman under the summer sky, his hand in hers, his voice whispering promises in the dark. Daniel's voice pulled her back. "Grandma, when she told me this, I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, thinking about you, about the photograph. And now I feel like maybe this isn't just my story. Maybe it's ours." Margaret reached across the table, her trembling hand covering his. "You're right, Daniel. Love doesn't end just because time moves forward. It stays with us, waiting for moments like these. Maybe it found you because it wanted to be remembered, because it wanted to live again." Daniel squeezed her hand. His eyes were bright, filled with emotion. "She makes me feel like I belong somewhere I didn't even know I was missing. And now, knowing this connection, I feel it even stronger. It's like love has been passed down, waiting for me." Margaret's smile trembled, her tears still flowing. "Then don't let it slip away, Daniel. Don't make the same mistake I did. When love is real, it's worth holding on to, no matter how hard life tries to pull you apart." He nodded firmly, his jaw set with quiet determination. "I won't, Grandma. I promise you that." The sun dipped lower outside, spilling golden light across the table. Margaret looked at the boy she had helped raise into a man and felt a bittersweet peace settle over her. She had carried the pain of losing James for so long. But now that pain was softened by the knowledge that he had carried her to. She hadn't been forgotten. Their love had not been erased, had echoed across time, finding its way into the present. Grandma Daniel said after a pause, "Do you ever wish things had been different? That you and James had stayed together?" Margaret let out a slow breath, her gaze drifting to the window where the light painted everything in soft gold. "Of course I wish it. There isn't a day I haven't thought of him. But life is not always about what we want. It's about what we can bear. I was given a good family, children who filled my days with joy, and grandchildren like you who bring me hope. That was my path. But yes, if I could speak to him one more time, I would thank him for loving me and tell him I never forgot him either." Her voice broke on the last word, and Daniel squeezed her hand even tighter. "I think he knew, Grandma. I think that's why he never let go of your memory." For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of years, the depth of love, and the quiet ache of longing filled the air between them. Margaret's tears fell freely now, but they were not only tears of sorrow, they were also tears of gratitude. Gratitude that James had remembered her. Gratitude that love had survived in ways she never imagined. Gratitude that Daniel had brought her this truth before it was too late. Finally, Margaret drew in a shaky breath and looked directly at her grandson. "Daniel, you must promise me something. Anything," he said without hesitation. "Promise me that when you love, you will love fully. That you won't let fear or the opinions of others take it from you. Promise me you'll fight for it, even when it feels difficult. Because Loveriel loves the one thing worth carrying through this life." Daniel nodded, his voice firm. "I promise, Grandma. I won't let it slip away." Margaret smiled through her tears, her heart trembling, not with sorrow, but with hope. She saw in him the chance for love to be reborn. For the story she had lost to find a new ending. The kettle on the stove gave a faint hiss, as if reminding them of its presence. Margaret finally lifted her teacup again. Her hand still shook, but this time she held it steady long enough to take a small sip. It was no longer about the teat, it was about proving to herself that she was strong enough to face what had been revealed. Daniel watched her, his eyes soft. "You're stronger than anyone I know, Grandma." She let out a gentle laugh, wiping her tears with the edge of her sleeve. "No, my dear. Love is what makes us strong. Even when it hurts, even when it leaves us, love is what carries us through." The room grew quiet again, but it was a peaceful quiet now, filled not with sorrow, but with acceptance. The setting sun bathed them in light, as though blessing the bond between past and future. Margaret felt her heart slow, her trembling ease as a calm truth settled within her. James had loved her. He had remembered her, and that was enough. As Daniel rose to help clear the table, Margaret's eyes followed him, filled with pride and tenderness. He would carry this story forward. He would carry love forward. And in that way, James would live on, not as a memory locked away, but as a legacy still unfolding. Margaret whispered to herself as the last light of day slipped away. Love never dies. It only waits, until we're ready to see it again. And with her grandson beside her, she finally believed it.